Good morning, everybody. I know it's weird lighting. My children are still asleep, so you're welcome. Uh, and it's currently 6 o'clock in the morning when I'm recording this. But anywho, I'm Liz. I'm your neighborhood creepy weirdo. This is Creating Crime Time. I'm your host. I sit down to talk about some true crime. Today we are discussing that of another alphabet killer. We are going to be talking about Joseph Naso. Now, I briefly discussed him in part 1 of this video. If you want to see that, I'll put in a card somewhere up here. Well, Joseph Naso. He is known to be an American serial killer and serial rapist, and he has been sentenced to death for that of 8 women. Well, Mr. Naso was actually born in Rochester, New York on the 7th of January of 1934, and he also served in the U.S. Air Force in the 1950s. He also met his first wife in or around the time that he was in the Air Force. That marriage lasted 18 years. They did divorce, but he continued to visit that wife frequently after she moved to San Francisco. They also had a son named Charles, but little Charles, he developed schizophrenia, and Joseph ended up taking care of him later, like in the later years, before he was arrested. So Joseph was known to frequent San Francisco colleges. He took various classes at a bulk of them in the 1970s. He also lived in the Mission District area of San Francisco. Then he resided in Piedmont, California in the 1980s. Now, he moved to Sacramento and lived there between 1999 and 2003, and then he finally settled in Reno, Nevada, 2004, where he would be arrested in 2011. He also worked as a freelance photographer, and he had a long history of petty crimes, including shoplifting, and he even committed these crimes up until he was in his mid-70s. Now, he had a nickname. He was nicknamed Crazy Joe because of his crazy behavior. So, the victims we will be discussing today is 6 of 8 of the victims that he has, or 6 confirmed out of the 8. So Roxanne Ragash, she was found dead on the 10th of January of 1977. Her body, unfortunately, had been found after it was dumped in Fairfax, California. She was about 18 years old and she stood 5'2". She had been strangled to death. Now, police estimated that her time of death was less than a day prior to being found. They also suggested that she was a sex worker, but her family completely denied this claim, that they didn't agree with what the police were saying about her. Our next victim is Carmen Lorraine Colon. I know this is a little weird because in part 1, our first victim, her name is Carmen Colon as well. I found it very odd, very odd. So, she was 22. She was found on the 13th of August of 1978. She was found along the Carquinez Scenic Highway, which is a road between Crockett and Port Costa, just about 30 miles from the first body. A highway patrol officer was going out after cattle shooting reports came to be. This is when he found the decomposing nude body because it had been dumped off of the side of the scenic highway. And she would later be identified as Carmen Colon. So the body of Sharia LaFern Johnson Patton had actually washed up at the Naval Net Depot in Tiburon, and she was 56 years old at the time of her murder, and this happened in 1981. At the time of her death, she was a resident in the Bay Area, and she was just looking for a job so she could continue her life. Now, Joseph managed a residence, and this is where Sharia lived. He also took a photograph of her. Now, he was considered the prime suspect in 1981 for her murder, but the cops gave severely elusive answers as to why he was never charged for the next 30 years. 30 years he went without being charged for her murder. So our next victim is actually a Bob Dylan groupie. She changed her name to Sarah Dillon. Her birth name is Renee Shapiro, and she changed her name to that of Bob Dylan's former wife. She was last seen on her way to a Bob Dylan concert at the Warfield Theater in San Francisco, and this was in May of 1992. She was killed around, like near or in Nevada County, California. So Pamela Ruth Parsons was a waitress, and her body would be discovered in Yuba County, California, and this is in 1993. She was 38 at the time. She had worked near Cooper Avenue in Yuba City, and this is where Joseph lived at that current time in 1993. He lived on Cooper Avenue. Tracy Lynn McKinney Tafoya was found dead in 1994, and this also happened in Yuba County. She was 31 at the time. Her killer, they noticed that had drugged her, raped her, and strangled her, and left her body in a cemetery, and this was at the Marysville Cemetery. Now, they determined that it had been at least a week that transpired between her dying and then finding her body. Very sad. Very sad. Like, you wish that nothing really bad would or time would transpire between finding them, and it's just sad. I always feel really bad for the victims' families, especially when they have to go so long between them dying and them finding them. I feel so terribly for them. Like, ugh, it's just so sad. I will say that Joseph Nosa is known to be a narcissistic sexual predator. And he had a thing of watching women that were around him as well. He also was known to keep certain things. So with Tracy, he kept newspaper clippings about her death and photos of her in his apartment. With Pamela, he ended up taking newspaper clippings as well about her death and keeping them in his apartment. Now, like I said, there is 10 women, well, 8 women that he was charged with their death, but we're only talking about 6 of them. And when you look up the different victims in this case, they give different names. And like they're here, I'll go through a list of them. So number 1 is a girl near Healdsburg. 2 is a girl near Port Costa. Then there's the one near Lagunitas, Mount Tam, girl from Miami near the peninsula, girl from Berkeley, lady from 839 Leavenworth, girl in Woodland, which is Yuba. Oh no, that's in Nevada County. Then there's girl from Yuba County, and then there's the girl from the cemetery, which is number 10. There are 4 that I didn't discuss. They're the 4 remaining women on the list that have not been identified, and police primarily tried to identify all of them, but obviously not all of them have been identified. And I wish that they will be identified, and they have different pictures of different girls, and they really tried to match them to the pictures that he had. And he also, another way that they tried to determine who these girls are is because Joseph Naso kept a rape diary, and he did different time spans, so like 1950 to 1960, and he wrote where, what they looked like, what year, and there's little descriptive marks, and sometimes there's an actual year. Like, I found 2 examples of it, and one of them, number 1, Rochester, which would be Rochester, New York. Italian girl, dark hair, long nose and buck teeth. Front seat of car, she wore a girdle, nylons, and was tight, cried, and she was 17. I was 16. That's what it says. There's quite a few from Rochester, New York, some from Buffalo, and then another one that I found from 1960 to 1970. There's a little more descriptive parts of this, um, where one is in Rochester. There's one, it doesn't say where it happens, but puts her down as having a good upbringing, and she was a very sweet girl. Then there's one in Oakland. It's like, I get it. He's keeping a ledger of how many people that he did SA to, but still, there's a fine line between wanting to be a creep and actually being a creep. Mm, mm, yeah. Now, I will say we did discuss that he was not linked to the cases in Rochester, New York. That is still an unsolved serial killer. I don't believe that he had anything to do with those killings. It is possible, but then again, I don't think that those girls were really what he wanted because they were so young. He had a thing. He really liked girls between like 16 and a little bit older. Like that was really his thing. From what I've read about him, that was definitely like what he liked. Yeah. So I mean, like I've already said, that he primarily lived in California for a long time, but he's from Rochester, New York, and he did travel back and forth. He was also known to live in London as well, and he traveled to a lot of different locations between 53 and 57. So he doesn't know, they don't know if he has any victims in other places. Now, they do believe, obviously, that he has killed at least 10 women. Only 6 have been fully identified, which is the 6 that are part of his convictions, and according to his rape diary, he has sexually assaulted over 100 women. So there's a lot of women, especially women that we don't know their names of. So another way they tried to identify these women is they took the photos they found that were in his possession and they shared them on social media. And they hoped that friends and family would see these pictures and identify them. Another way too is like that of um, Carmen Cologne. They ended up taking her nail clippings, and that's how they were able to match the DNA found under the nail clippings. And mind you, they clipped these in 1978. They saved them, and then in 2010 they tested them for a DNA analysis, and they matched Joseph Naso. And with Roxanne Ragash, our first victim that we talked about, which would be, they think it's the girl from Logonitas. That's the one on his list. Well, they found a pair of nylons. That's what he used to strangle her, and there's three pairs of nylons that were found on her. One that strangled her, one that was in her mouth, and then she was also wearing a pair of nylons. So the nylons that were around her mouth contained DNA from Joseph's wife, so that confirmed that they came from like his house, and there was also semen present. So they tested that against him. He's not a very smart man. That sounds really bad, but he's not a very smart man. He left quite a trail when it came to DNA. Obviously, back when he committed these, he was probably thinking, I'm never gonna get in trouble for this. Never. No, it's not even gonna be a thing. Well, flash forward to the future, they can test for these things now. So it wasn't very smart that he didn't cover his tracks. So he would end up violating his parole and probation for one of his petty crimes, and he was arrested in April of 2010. They searched his home, and this is when they found the rape diary. They also found all of his other clippings and stuff when it comes to the different victims that were found. And in this diary, they mentioned the 10 women, 10 unnamed women in geographical locations. On the 11th of April of 2011, so a year later, he was charged with the murders of Rogosh, Cologne, Parsons, and Tafoya. And all 4 victims that he was arrested for, they're all listed as prostitutes by the police. I hate when they just slap a moniker on them. Hate it. The other 6 women that I listed in that list were also mentioned in the diary, and they had remained unidentified at that time. Well, later prosecutors would introduce evidence identifying Patton and Dylan, and on August 20th of 2013, Joseph would be convicted by a Marin County jury of the murders, and he would be sentenced to death on November 22nd of 2013. Now, he remains a person of interest in the case of the Rochester Alphabet murders, which is from 1971 and 1973, since 4 of his victims bore double initial names like Pamela Parsons, and then Carmen Cologne, Roxanne Rogosh. They have double initials, Tracy Tafoya. It's the same thing with the Rochester, New York double initial murders. And the only way you're really going to be able to know what their names are is if you get close to them, you keep stalking them for a long time, which it seems to be a thing based on the photos that I found that he had in his possession. He stalked them. But yeah, so he remained a person of interest in the case, but they ruled him out because the DNA that was on one of the victims in California didn't match one of the ones in Rochester, which was the DNA sample that they tested against on Wanda. So he currently still has not been executed. He is sitting pretty in jail right now. Yeah. And he was sentenced in 2013, but it's kind of just like a waiting game for him to be executed. But yeah, that, my friends, is the case of Joseph Naso, the California alphabet murder. I'm really happy that justice has been served because people like him freak me out and they terrify me because I have 2 small children and that keeps me awake at night. So I hope you guys enjoy, and I will see you tomorrow in another video. I believe we're going to Italy tomorrow. We shall see. Bye, guys.